So we are going to actually jump into genetics this week. So we're going to talk about the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel. We're going to do some Punnett squares and just give you a quick introduction to genetics. So the first thing we're going to start with is Objective 44, the definition of genetics. It's the study of heredity and how traits are passed from parent to offspring. Okay? So how your parents pass traits on to you. That's what genetics is, and that's what we're going to be getting into. So there was this guy, Gregor Mendel, and he's called the father of genetics. He did some experiments with some pea plants that I'm going to explain to you in just a few minutes. He was an Austrian monk that lived in the mid-1800s. He was not a scientist. He was just curious about how things worked. And so through his experiments, he figured out how traits are passed down. He observed pea plants and how they pass their genetic information to produce different types of pea plants, because he was observing some are tall, some are short, some have purple flowers, some have white flowers, some have a green pod color, some have a yellow pod color. And so he was observing all these things, and he was wondering, why is this happening? Okay, so let's talk about it. So the first thing he did is he said, hey, if I take a tall pea plant and I cross that with another tall pea plant, saying this is a male, this is a female, what am I going to get? And he found if I take a tall and a tall, I'm going to get a tall pea plant. So then he duplicated that same experiment, this time with short. If I take a short pea plant, male short and a female short pea plant, guess what? I get a short pea plant. And then he said, well, what's going to happen if I cross a tall pea plant and a small pea plant? And what happened is he took the tall pea plant, and I don't know if it was a male or female, and he crossed it with a short pea plant, and he found that he got a tall pea plant. And he was wondering, why did that happen? How come I didn't get a short? How come I didn't get a medium pea plant? What happened? So then he ended up with this second generation. Okay, the second generation of plants was one tall, remember that was one tall parent, one short parent, and we ended up with these tall plants. And so then he crossed those. Okay, so this is the second generation. These are the parents of these plants were tall and short, and we got tall. So when we took the offspring of this tall and short, and we multiplied them together, we figured out we got 3 tall and 1 short. Well, then he was really curious. What the heck is going on? So he did some more experiments. Okay, and we're going to talk about those, and we're going to get into Punnett squares, and it is going to explain to you why did we get 3 tall and 1 short. Okay? So the next thing we're going to talk about is genes. So Mendel's work led him to the understanding that traits such as plant height are carried in pairs of information, not by single sets of information. Okay, so when we talk about humans have pairs of chromosomes, and you've already heard this because we have pairs, 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 46 chromosomes altogether. Okay, so the genes are parts of a chromosome. They carry the information on the chromosome. Chromosomes are made up of DNA and divided into sections called genes. So everything that he is saying is right here. So this is a chromosome. Chromosomes make up this long strand of DNA, and the different parts of the DNA are called genes. Okay? Objective 45, I can describe genes and traits. What is the difference? Small sections of DNA are responsible for a trait. These small sections are called genes. So the gene itself is the segment of DNA that codes for a specific trait. So your gene is a code. The trait is the actual characteristic an organism can pass on to its offspring. So this gene right here, this gene 2, might be for if you can roll your tongue or bend your tongue or not. And this is the trait. This is the gene. This is the trait. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Gene is a segment of DNA. The trait is a characteristic an organism can pass. Okay? 46. There are 4 types of genes. The first type in the most two we're going to talk about are dominant and recessive. So a dominant gene is a gene that is always expressed and hides the others. A recessive gene is a gene that is only expressed when a dominant gene isn't present. An incomplete dominance is genes that work together to produce a third trait. For example, if you took red flowers and white flowers, you would end up with pink flowers. That's incomplete dominance. And then we have codominance, which is how our blood types work. Genes that work together and both traits show up in red flowers and white. So if we took red flowers and white flowers, we would get patchy red and white flowers. We wouldn't get pink. We wouldn't get all red. We wouldn't get all white. They would be codominant. Both the red and the white would show up. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. We are going to talk about this more and more and more. So let's move on. Human traits. Okay, so earlobe attachment. The dominant trait is unattached. The recessive trait is attached. And when we talk about dominant and recessive traits, we use letters. So we're going to use E for earlobe attachment, and so we're going to use a capital E for unattached, and a lowercase e indicates recessive. So dominants are shown by a capital letter, recessives by a lowercase letter. Tongue rolling, we'll use a T for this one, a capital T for a can roll their tongue, and a lowercase for the recessive trait cannot roll their tongue. Check these out on yourself. Do you have dimples? So we'll use a capital D for dimples. If you don't have dimples, that's a recessive trait. Handedness. If you are right-handed, you have a dominant trait. If you are left-handed, you have a recessive trait. Hand clasping. If you fold your hands, is your left thumb on top? If so, that's a dominant trait. If your right thumb is on top, that's a recessive trait. Again, lowercase letters for recessive, capital letters for dominant, and you'll find out why soon. For your hairline, do you have a widow's peak? That means on your hairline, does your hairline like come to a little point there? If you do, that's a dominant trait. If you have a straight hairline, that's a recessive trait, and that's a lowercase w. Okay? Objective 47, I can describe how dominant genes mask recessive genes. So dominant and recessive genes. A dominant gene will always mask a recessive gene. A widow's peak is dominant. Not having a widow's peak is recessive. If one parent contributes a gene for widow's peak and the other parent doesn't, the offspring will have a widow's peak. Basically what they're saying. So, mom and dad, okay? Mom has widow's peak, so she's going to pass down that trait. Dad doesn't have it, so he has a lowercase w. Okay? So if mom passes it down and dad doesn't, you get this. We're going to talk about what this is, but you get a capital and a lowercase. Anytime you have a capital letter, that is the dominant trait. It is going to mask the recessive gene. So what's going to show up is a person, if this is their genotype, what's going to show up is the person will have a widow's peak. Okay? If the dominant gene, if the capital letter is present, then that gene will show up. We will do this more in class. We're going to talk about it more. I know it's a little bit confusing because you've never done this before. Objective 48. I can use a Punnett square to predict the probability of traits. So a Punnett square is a tool we use for predicting the traits of an offspring. Letters are used as symbols to designate genes. Capital letters are for dominant genes. We talked about that already. Capital letters for dominant genes. Lowercase letters are used for recessive genes. And genes always exist in pairs. Because our chromosomes are in pairs, 23 pairs of chromosomes, our genes are always in pairs. Okay. So, let's talk about how this works. No, go back. Okay, so if one parent, if this is parent 1, sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, so if this is parent 1 and their genes that they have available is a capital and a lowercase, that means that they are exhibiting the dominant trait because they have a capital letter. Parent 2 is also going to exhibit the same thing. They have the dominant trait because they have a capital letter in their pair. we are going to fill these in. So this one is going to go down, so there's our first capital B, and this capital B goes across. There's our second capital B. Again, this capital here goes down, so there's that capital B, and this lowercase b goes across, so there's that lowercase. This capital B over here, we're talking about our second column, so our lowercase is going to go down, our uppercase goes across, and then we have lowercase, lowercase, so this lowercase goes down, this lowercase goes across. That's how we get that there. So if we were talking about the pea plants, guys, let me erase this out of here so that we can talk about this. If we were talking about the pea plants, remember the tall pea plant was dominant. So when we took those two, remember the second generation, these are the parents, okay, and we got tall, tall. Okay, so the parents, this parent passed down a tall, this parent passed down a short, this parent passed down a tall, this parent passed down a short. That was a recessive. So capital, lowercase, capital, lowercase. It's just exactly what is happening here. We have a capital and a lowercase, a capital and a lowercase. Okay? So when we fill those in on this Punnett square, because there's capital letters there, that's going to be the tall pea plant. There's a capital letter in there, there's a tall pea plant. There's a capital letter in here. The recessive trait is being masked. Guess what? We have two recessive traits here, so that was the one short pea plant that we saw. Okay? If you don't get this, please don't worry. We're going to be doing lots of this in class. Objective 49. I can define homozygous, heterozygous, and alleles. So, again, we go back to root words. This word right here, homo, means same. And this word, hetero, here, means different. Okay? So we're going to talk about what those mean. All organisms have 2 copies of each gene. Remember, our chromosomes come in pairs, 23 pairs. 1 contributed by the dad, 1 by mom. Remember I told you, remember in your egg cell and your sperm cell, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. They each gave us a copy. So same thing, because your chromosomes are made up of DNA, which is made up of genes, you get half of your genes from mom and half from dad. Okay? So, homozygous means mom passed down a dominant trait and dad passed down a dominant trait. Homo means same, so you have 2 capital letters. This is also homozygous, okay? 2 lowercase letters. Heterozygous means 2 different genes, 1 capital, 1 lowercase. And an allele is a variation of a given gene expressed as either an upper or a lowercase. So this is an allele, this is an allele. It's one of them. If I say what's the allele from mom, you would say capital B. If I say what's the allele from dad, you would say lowercase b. Okay? All right, moving on. What is the chance the offspring of these 2 people will have a widow's peak? Mom is homozygous, and that moved because I didn't put it in drawing mode. Sorry. Mom is homozygous recessive. Remember, homo means same. So, mom is 2 lowercase w's. Dad is heterozygous, meaning 1 of each. And it doesn't matter if you put dad on this side and mom on this side. It doesn't matter. You're still going to get the same. So we're going to cross them. Remember, we're moving this lowercase w across. So lowercase, lowercase. This is lowercase also. We're going to move it across. Lowercase, lowercase. This is a capital. We're moving it down. So capital, capital. And this is lowercase. So we're going to move this lowercase down. Lowercase, lowercase. So it says, what is the chance the offspring of these 2 people will have widow's peak? Widow's peak is dominant, so we are looking for any time there's a capital letter. So here's a capital letter, here's a capital letter. 2 out of 1, 2, 3, 4 times. 2 over 4 equals 50% chance that their kid will have a widow's peak. Okay, and that's how a Punnett square works. Objective 50, I can describe genotype and phenotype. I think I've already used that word once with you. The genotype is the set of alleles, the letters. Okay, when I say what's the genotype, I want you to give me 2 letters, and they need to be the same letter, either capitals, or both lowercase, or 1 capital, 1 lowercase. The genotype is the letters. The phenotype is the physical appearance. Okay, So if I say, what's the genotype, and you say, it's capital W, lowercase w, and then I say, what's the phenotype, you're going to say widow's peak. Because the dominant trait is going to show up. The recessive trait is masked. Okay? Moving on. And that's it. I guess that's it for the end of your intro to genetics. Guys, I know you're going to have questions. Please bring them into class, but we're going to be doing a ton of stuff to reinforce everything that we just talked about. Lots of fun stuff too. All right, have a great day. See you in class.